I'm back again. Earlier than expected. Earlier than expected. That's very funny. We're back again. Walking as usual. And enjoying the nature, of course, as we tend to do. A new idea just came to my head. Is it new? I'm like Giannis. It's not really new. Whoa there, ref. Watch out. Come on, ref. That's a yellow card right there. Here. So you can see what that was. If I wasn't looking, would have got caught with that one. Alright. So yeah, this idea that I was thinking about. What is it about? So, you know how there's a question about whether we live in a simulation? And some people think that way because they're just like, everything just, it's a little perfect, you know? And it could be a simulation by anyone, right? I think people probably would have different ideas as to who would set up the simulation and why. But the idea that we live in a simulation is interesting because I ended up watching this video. I forget this guy's name. He was in a podcast. Pretty much he was talking about how what they did is they had this machine, bro. Like I sound like an old head right now, bro. Damn. Well, this machine that I heard somebody else. That I think like I things echoing in my ear, bro. Trying to make sure I respect the space if somebody's like walking next to me and stuff like that, you know, not being loud, because we are in a shared public space, you know. But anyways, so this dude on the podcast was talking about how some scientists in a like tech company ended up slicing a dragonfly's brain, and they sliced it so small and so thinly that they could model the brain digitally, right? Like modeling the neurons, where they are, the sort of connections that exist. Literally just like bar for bar copy of the dragonfly's brain digitally. Okay, so they did that. And then what they did is they created a digital environment, I guess, kind of like a sandbox, for those of you that know. And they ended up recreating the brains, the dragonfly, really, of it. They ended up recreating the dragonfly, like a digital dragonfly, with the data that they copied from the real one. How you doing, dude? And so to pretty much to determine if the dragonfly would behave, the digital one would behave the same way as the real one that they ended up slicing. And so what you can imagine this being is like pretty much creating a copy version of you as you are. That's essentially how they kind of communicated it. And then seeing if you would behave the same way or not. So anyways, I'm trying to figure out where I'm going, because I gotta make sure I know where I'm going. But so yeah, they sliced the brain and then they let it run around, like they kind of set it loose, the digital one, in its sandbox environment. And so what the dragonfly ended up doing is essentially the same things that the real one was doing. And what I mean by that, it was like it started walking the same way, like crawling and stuff like that. It started like looking for food, like, you know, pecking the floor and looking for, like, searching. Like the things that you would expect. It started doing that. And then they're like, oh damn, like we literally just made like a digital copy of its brain and let it loose, but we didn't expect it to immediately behave like its real counterpart, because then does that mean the neuron, I think I know where I am right now. Does that mean that the neurons are sort of like programmed to do the same things, right? Are they in a simulation? Are they simulated in a way to behave in a certain way, depending on an environment or like any given input in said environment, right? So then that makes you question, like, are humans like that too? You know, are we like programmed to think certain ways if our brain and neurons are kind of wired already set to fire in a certain way? And so if we were to just follow through with that, would that be like the extent of our existence? Fucking shit, I can't even say what I'm trying to say. But essentially, because I'm like still also looking, but essentially what they were saying was like, hey, like, are we like programmed to do certain things? Do we like have free will? Because then that begs that question, right? Like, if you have free will, then does that mean that you don't always do the same thing? Can you like will yourself to not do something that your body is probably, you know, to a certain extent programmed to do, right? Like if there was a lion right there, which I hope there isn't. Oh, I'm back. Somehow I made it back to this place. One of my favorite places right here is the horse track. Oh my God, check it out. Check it out. Fully set up, it seems. Last time it wasn't really set up. It was actually a soccer field last time. But this is nice. This is really nice. Anyways, going back to what I was saying. Oh, I think I found my spot. Well, we're gonna take a moment to bask in the sun and continue this conversation. What is this? Oh boy. Found a little, what do you call this thing here? A log? Yep, that's exactly what it is. It's a log. So anyways, if we're programmed and designed to behave in certain ways, like I was saying with the lion, right? I would probably scream. Wow, that was the first thing I thought of. That's funny. I'd get super scared, like my heart would start racing. I'd probably start sweating, and I'd probably try to figure out a way to run away if my mind isn't already like cooked. Right? To be creative enough in the moment to figure out a way to get away from a lion, bro. Mountain lion. That would be crazy. So anyways, is that a simulation? Right? Like if everybody gets angry in the same way, everybody gets depressed in the same way, everybody gets happy in the same way, you know, does that mean we have like certain things that are there, and are we fighting those things because maybe we don't either accept that, or we're kind of swimming upstream essentially, right? Because we don't know type shit. So yeah, that was the YouTube video, the interview the dude was talking about, and it was so interesting because, like, you know, because the conversation was actually about quantum mechanics. Now I'm getting really deep in a way that is not that fun, but we'll make it fun. Let's try. So quantum mechanics is essentially, do I even know? Let's see. What is it? I'm trying to remember right now, bro. Part of what it is, at least that I understand, is that particles don't stay in the same place. They're always in many places at the same time. Until, here's a caveat, until like they're being observed, right? So, which is crazy, right? We're already like too damn up there right now. So essentially, it's around the idea that like everything is always moving, right? Electrons always moving. Nobody's like standing still. Nobody's at the same spot. Then so that applies to particles, right? And so what makes it interesting, if that was just the end of that, I think that would be, you know, a good finding. But the caveat, which makes then that idea interesting, is that like when you start to observe a particle to see where it's at and where it's going to be, it ends up staying in the same place. And so they call this idea like, you know, particles are always in multiple places until they're being observed, right? So whatever that means, I still don't understand what that means. But I think what it means is that if things change based on our existence and what we think, what we say, blah, 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 then what was he saying? He was saying, does that mean that we also contribute to how we experience life? Wow, brought it together somehow. Holy shit, I brought it together. Okay, thought I was gonna get lost there. So yeah, does that mean that our consciousness has an ability to impact reality? And in a way, we kind of know that it does. I think off vibes most of the time, or off of like just, you know how people say like you can tell if somebody's feeling differently just off of vibes without that person communicating to you, blah, blah, blah. So like, you know, those intuitive things, I would say. And those would be because your consciousness somehow is able to like impact the world you live in. And in the same way, you're able to feel what's going on in the world through that same mechanism, I guess. It's like a two-way street. And so then, you know, then I was starting to think about like, damn, so let's think about like flow, right? Like when somebody's hooping and they just get in the zone, they don't really stop, they can't miss shots. Man, fucking De'Aaron Fox. Fuck De'Aaron Fox, man. Let me just say that real quick. That was a bigger moment than I wanted it to be, but holy shit, De'Aaron Fox. I'm gonna just take a quick tangent here real quick, bruh. You guys watched the last finals, man? That finals was, a lot could be said. A lot could be said. But De'Aaron Fox and Mitch Johnson, the coach, I think they disappointed a lot of people. I'll say that. Without being overly explicit. But anyways, going back to that idea, right? Like, if your consciousness could impact the world, then does that mean that you are also somewhat capable of changing your reality and the things that you experience? So I was like, ooh, that's really interesting. You know, because there are two ideas. Like, you know, are we programmed to think in a certain way? And the second idea is, are we able to impact things outside of us? And so then I started thinking about flow, right? So basketball, going back to not De'Aaron Fox, but basketball. When you're in a zone and you're a shooter, it's kind of really hard to explain how that works. You're just lit, like you don't miss. You can't feel like you can't miss. You don't feel like you can miss. Your feel on the ball just feels the same consistently every time. Your rhythm is the same. You feel like you're in a dance that really never interrupts until it gets interrupted somehow, right? Either something, I don't know. I'm not even gonna try to explain why that might happen. But anyways, flow is really interesting because it's one of those states where you are not kind of there as much as you could be, right? Like it's kind of like your brain is working for you on default settings, I guess, where you are not able to interrupt it. It kind of assumes control and life kind of happens to you. That's kind of what flow feels like. But you like what it feels like and you know how to not interrupt it, depending on how good you are in whatever that field is, right? So I would imagine for hoopers, for basketball shooters, right? The last thing you're gonna do is like change your form. You know what I'm saying? Like the last thing you're gonna do is not take a shot. You're gonna do the same thing over and over again until you miss. And oftentimes it takes a while if you really are in that zone, right? So that's like the other side of that, right? So like if we are consciously participating in our world, and our consciousness is our ways to like feel and understand the world and what's going on, could you also mess up the process of what already exists by, I don't know, by doing things that would not keep you in a flow? Meaning like involving yourself in the process of what's happening, right? So like there's two ideas. One is, can we impact what happens with our consciousness? And the second thing is, and if you can, do you disturb when you do? Do you disturb like the natural process of how things work? Because then if you do, then that may possibly explain why the particles stay in the same place when they're being observed, because you are also impeding what would naturally be happening throughout the process, which I think is really interesting. Because then, you know, if flow is when you're not really there and can't get in the way of yourself, then what does that mean about when in the other times when you're not in a flow, right? I would imagine like maybe that's what anxiousness and or maybe like symptoms of anxiety might feel like for someone, where I feel like they're getting in the way of the natural process of how the world works. And so it's like the idea that, like, you know, if you keep thinking about and worrying about something happening, it's likely going to happen, right? But if you just move along and live your life and don't try to control as much of what life is, whatever that means to you or to me, right? If you try not to get in the way of what already is, then life oftentimes kind of happens in ways that you want it to happen too, right? So it's like a technical way of pretty much saying trust the process of life and try not to control it, right? Because you can want to control life so badly that you end up not being able to live. Wow, I really brought it together. Wow, I'm doing numbers today. But yeah, so I was like, damn, so like, am I really getting in my way? Like when I do, is that what that means? Is it because I'm like trying to control the environment, that like the environment itself ends up being what it is that I didn't want? And I'm thinking about that, like, you know, when it comes to like trading, and I trade, like, you know, the more badly I want to win any day, the less likelihood I will have of actually winning. You know what I mean? If I sense that I'm being desperate for a certain outcome any day, regardless of what happened over the weekend, blah, 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 I realize that I get in my way. So then I'm starting to think, like, you know, if that's what it is, then it makes me consider the idea that, like, we might be doing not more harm. Now I sound like a freaking whatever. But I don't know if the word is harm. I think we're finding ways to interrupt the natural flow of life, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but in certain instances, I feel like it does kind of make us miss out on what it truly would have been, untapped, untouched. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. That sounds like up here. I don't even know what that means. But I just know that life is perfect as it is. That's essentially my point. And if we can stop trying to not prioritize, optimize it, and trying to make it like a perfect experience by creating as many variables as possible. Now I'm talking like an engineer, because that's what I am. But anyways, if you keep adding as many variables to an equation gets complex, my boy. It gets a little weird, and you have to think, like X amount of times, and you have to think about that many edge cases. You have to think about blah blah blah. And I just think, and this is also another thing that the dude was talking about in the podcast, is that I'm always thinking that life and the way it's designed is perfect and simple, right? And so if it feels complicated to us, it's likely because we are introducing, holy cow, we're introducing new variables into the equation that were really never meant to be there. So then you can imagine where our desire, and like this is like what Buddhism says, right? Like if you have desires, then by default you're going to suffer, because the process of wanting something makes you have expectations, and when the expectations don't come true, then you hurt. You feel me? So damn, what was the point of that? Lost my thought. But yeah, going back to the amount of variables, right? So I think personally too, as he said, that I think life is perfect and simple, and the more we complicate it, the worse it gets. And so when I'm thinking about it, like my personal life, when I'm writing code, blah blah blah, and trading, right, I'm thinking to myself, when I desperately want to win, how many variables am I creating for myself to have to evaluate to make a decision to either go long or short, right? Like, am I getting in the way of like my natural process of execution? So I'm like, maybe I am, like, because I feel like, I have a good understanding. For example, going back to trading, I feel like I have a decent understanding of how to trade. The only times that I do make mistakes is when I get in the way of the whole thing and I try to control it. And that is like a tendency that I'm starting to realize and think about that could possibly exist in other parts of my life, right? And so I'm starting to think, if I want to control a trade so badly, then in what other ways am I also trying to control an outcome of something that's happening in life, right? That may not necessarily be related to trading and things like that. Is there a possibility? These are questions I'm asking myself, right? Is there a possibility that I have even more room to expand? You know what I'm saying? Like, when you want to control things, you shrink. But when you let go, oftentimes you take a deep breath, all that good stuff, you expand, right? Like you feel like life, and you're full of life, right? And so how we even came to this thought was because, like, I started noticing these patterns, right? Because I've been journaling my trades and things like that. And I'm glad I've been doing that, because that's really been helping me with like seeing better results, but without forcing things, and kind of just letting yourself somehow fall into a state of flow. And if you have something that you want so badly, that you just intentionally figure out ways to walk away, right? And it's much easier said than done, obviously, especially with trading, right? 95% of traders fail, if you didn't know. But I think it's important to think about, because when I think of like art and like when I like design things, when I think of like where things should be, in an OCD sort of like fashion, I get super super interested in how things should be shaped, set, colored, shaped. Did I just say that? I think I said that. You know, and so like the more I put things, the more variables again that I put on whatever it is that I'm trying to do, the more complicated it gets, and the uglier it feels, really. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to websites and I'm like writing a code or whatever, the first time like I create the UI, it's like decent, you know, it's cool, all right, good start. And then weeks go by, whatever, I come back to it and it just looks ugly. And so I make a change, and then I go away again, I come back. But before I left, I was satisfied with the second change that I made, and I thought that this would be, you know what I mean, the one. So I go back, move on, come back again, and I see it, and I just don't like it again. So I make it even better. And so as I'm noticing with these iterations of changes I'm making, the amount of times that I've, like the last time that I stopped, or the amount of times that I've desired to make changes, reduce themselves, the fewer variables I keep on whatever the thing is, right? So like the first design, I reduce some things, it looks much better. That was the second iteration. Third iteration, I come back, reduce even more things, and it looks even better. And then fourth time I come back, you know, I do the same thing, reduce, blah, blah, blah. And things just make sense even more, right? So I don't think I have to read a book to feel that way, or to understand, or like, you know, to feel like the natural tendencies of life that you kind of feel intuitively, things like that. So it makes me think, and you know, I'll be getting curious, you know, that life is even more interesting than we thought. But yeah, can you imagine? You work so hard, but the more you work hard, and this is a saying that people say, of course, right? Like, work smarter, not harder, all that good stuff. And, you know, people would be like, well, you know, then, you know, if you compare like whatever, a CEO or a janitor, and you see who's like working harder for real, would you say that the person that's working harder is like getting more out of it as far as like output compared to the input that they're putting in, right? Like, I gotta stop talking like an engineer, dude. Why am I talking like I'm writing some code right now? But anyways, I thought that was interesting, really interesting, right? Like you can impact the world, but you can impact it in a good and a bad way. And oftentimes, like, as they say, like, you know, psychologists say that, I don't know, like more than half, I don't know what the specific percentage is, but it's the majority. They say the majority of our thoughts are negative. That's what they say. So if the majority of our thoughts are negative, then, you know, that speaks to the majority stats, obviously, that you can imagine out there. So I think it's really interesting to think about like how it can also mean that like maybe you're trying to control things that you don't have control over, which kind of explains why people find that they find peace in believing in God and praying in a higher being that you can kind of like let like whoever that person is to you, right, whatever you believe in, to have that ownership of how well your life goes, right? Because then you can give up that control that would have maybe possibly otherwise got you in trouble, right? That's also another thing to think about. But anyways, 29 minutes. We have We have outdone ourselves yet again. But I think that's all I got. I don't want to start making things up now. So, wow, water feels so damn good. Guess I'm thirsty as shit. Anyways, it was great chatting with you yet again on the idea of how we impact our lives by simply existing. And yeah, let me know if you have some thoughts about that in the comments. Did that make sense to you? Did that not make sense? And I don't mean that in the sense like, oh, you know, does that compute? No, I mean like, are you like another person that kind of sees it in that way, or do you feel like it's a bunch of, you know, garbage? And that's okay if that's what you think. Just let me know. Curious what you think and what thoughts you have about it. And until next time, I suppose. Hope you're having a great one. I'll see you later.